This is KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank.
Welcome back to One Royal Way. I am Josh Keiser and joined today by a very special guest, Austin Cox, Southpaw for the Kansas City Royals, is joining us for some time. Austin, we appreciate you joining us here today, man.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for having me.
We've kind of been trying to get hooked up with the team and get some of you guys in here to kind of learn more about you, what makes you tick, and kind of go from a day-to-day. So we appreciate you joining us. And I kind of want to start from the beginning here. Doing some research here, and I saw an interview with your parents actually kind of around your debut, and they were telling stories about, you coming up through baseball and kind of their experiences and stuff. And one thing kind of stood out was your dad told a story about when you were 4 years old, you asked your dad if there was anybody from Forsyth, Georgia that had ever played in the big leagues. Mm-hmm. And he said that he wasn't real sure, didn't think so. And you said that you wanted to be the first one from Forsyth to play in the Major League Baseball. First off, shout out to you for having the foresight and the ability to dream big to make that a possibility. When I was 4, I wanted to be a Ninja Turtle, so that's the differences between the two of us here. But I guess mostly, what was it about baseball when you were 4 years old and even now that kind of drew you to it and kept you going, kept you driving, and it kind of brought you where you are today?
I'm not 100% positive. I feel like it was just everything about the game I loved, even from a young age. So I was a big Braves fan growing up, and like the ins and outs of like Chipper was my guy. So like him hitting both ways and like all of those types of things, like Smoltz, Glavine, Maddox, like the big three, like that was, I just always was enthralled by baseball. Like it was just always like, it didn't matter. Like it changed with the season, definitely. Like I definitely at some point probably told him that I was going to play in the NFL too. But for the most part, baseball was always that love and passion. Like it always was where I found myself like at home, I guess. Like I always felt like I was like me on a baseball field.
That makes a lot of sense. And you were a football player back in Forsyth as well?
So I went to high school in Macon, Georgia. So it's like west north. But I played football in high school, and then but that was it. I wasn't very good at basketball. So that one was I never said I was going to be in the NBA. So.
Yeah, sure. What's the position of football?
So I was a quarterback for 3 years. We ran the option, and I wasn't very fast. So we'll need a receiver, because in the option, the receiver is basically a glorified tight end. And I was a receiver my senior year, played a little bit of defensive end my senior year too.
Oof. Yeah, that's versatility, but it does seem like every MLB player that once played baseball seems to be quarterback, because uber athlete, makes a lot of sense, strong arm. Yeah, kind of fits.
Yeah, I could throw it.
Yeah, I bet that's true.
Couldn't run.
You were a round peg in a square hole in the option, it seems like.
Exactly.
Well, let's get back to baseball here, and you kind of talk about, we've heard, I think Alec Marsh talked about in the preseason, the kind of the differences between the developmental approaches. You don't have to get super specific or anything here, but what was kind of your differences between how you've developed or approached development with your even with your jump to the major leagues this year? What has been the big difference between your developmental approach between last year, the years prior to that, to this point?
I felt a lot of it was no longer chasing the numbers. It was more like the ERA. It was more chasing what's going to succeed at the big league level. I had an okay year last year, and there was just a lot of conversation that was started by me. It was started by our pitching side, Paul Gibson, Sweeney when we got into camp, Bove, all of those guys. Like it was kind of, everybody was kind of diving into, hey, what's next? Like what is it that is going to get you to the next level? And I felt like there was just a really good plan. Like it was no longer like, hey, everything's good, keep doing what you're doing. Like you're putting up decent numbers, like it'll turn. It was, hey, this is what we see for you. This is what we think you need to do. Like it was very cut and dry. Like And I was talking to a guy that owns a baseball facility in Atlanta, and we were just talking about how like minor leaguers as a whole, if you said go run into that brick wall 5 times and it'll get you to the big leagues, like they're gonna do it. They're minor leaguers. Like you're wired that way to like if they give you something to go get, like you're gonna do everything in your power or you're gonna give out doing it. And so it was very nice. Like the plan, like we got a plan in the off season of like grips and movements and all of that stuff. So I was able to spend the whole off season, all of my bullpens gearing towards what they wanted, like what they saw as me being successful at the big league level. And I feel like that was really the big difference of the start I was able to have early in the year and when I got called up.
For sure. And then the hard work is paying off for sure. And it's interesting to kind of hear that, because we know that you did spend some time at Kansas City Strength and Conditioning. They are a day one sponsor of the One Royal Way podcast. So we are also very good friends with them as well. And that kind of made us curious. And it's also something we've always been curious about is we know that you guys kind of seek personal training and personal coaches that might be a little bit closer to where you're living or where you're wanting to spend the off season. So how is that related back and coordinated back with the organization? Are they pretty hands-on? Are they hands-off? Has it been different from how it's been, or what did they have you working on, or if it's like coordinated through you, or how much input do you have on it?
So it's a little of both. At the beginning of the off season, they ask us for the contacts. So the strength department asks for like John at KCSC's number. Mm-hmm. They'll have a call with him, talk through his program, added anything that the Royals feel like is needed. And then on the pitching side, Eli McFadden was at KCSC. He's now at AA in our organization, but he was big on reaching out to whether it was, he has connections with pro scouts, he has connections with amateur scouts and all these guys. So he was big on like reaching out and seeing like, hey, this is what they gave you, but this is also what I'm hearing. Like, and combining it, he would talk with guys in the organization, like Paul Gibson. They would come by, watch a bullpen in the off season, those types of things. And he would communicate with them and say, hey, like, you know, this is what we're working on. What do you see? And so that communication was huge. Eli was always a guy that was just very upfront and honest with me. At the beginning of the offseason, he just looked at me and was like, hey, your stuff's average right now. Like, we have to do something to separate you from average. And he's like, that's also what I'm hearing from pro scouts, amateurs, everybody. Like, your mentality's great, but your stuff's average. And so we worked really, really hard this offseason on separating that. And that was, I feel like, the big jump that I kind of was able to make this year. But yeah, there's a lot of communication on both ends. I was very, very pleased with Eli and how he was able to communicate with everyone and kind of help move me in that direction.
And that whole situation is very fluid, and even very much so, still very fluid. Communication's always super, super imperative here. And it kind of makes me wonder, when you guys go out there on a day-to-day basis, and you can kind of speak for yourself here, you're towing the line between, you know, the day-to-day game plan, but potentially like what you're working on versus like your grips or your techniques or your movements, or trying to keep things in mind, as well as like what feels good for the day. Like, it's always a very fascinating game, like balancing act that you guys are kind of dealing with. So could you kind of speak to that a little bit? Is like, what is it, just as simple as going out there, getting outs as best you can and moving on to the next guy? Or is it, sticking to the game plan, but also trying to see what works at this point?
So I was told very early in my pro ball career by Mike Sweeney. Mm-hmm. And then one day, and it was in rookie ball, and he was saying, hey, don't try to take everything in at once. Like, that'll be like drinking through a fire hose. And
yeah.
He was like, take these things. If you like it, apply it. If you don't, stick it in your backpack and save it for later. And you're just loading your backpack up for down the road for when you do get to the big leagues, and it's okay, let's start okay, I'm struggling. Let's start filing through these things that could possibly help. But I think that there's a fine line, like you said, to going out and just competing, and also like working on things, like trying a new grip in the game, like finding the right opportunity to throw a pitch, and also just trusting the work that you've put in. And I think that's, our staff is very, very good with Sweeney, Bove, Stet, all of those guys. They're huge on, let's make some adjustments, but when you get in the game, do whatever you trust is what you do. Like, your stuff is your stuff. Trust your stuff. And then once you have worked on something enough to trust it, go implement it in the game. They never will force us to, like, hey, we worked on a new slider grip yesterday. You're in the game today against the Orioles, and we're going to try to throw this backdoor slider that you worked on one time. Like, that's never really the mentality. It's very much like, do what you trust, and once you trust it, then you implement it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I did see a video and noticed that you struck out Shohei looking the other day. I bet that was pretty awesome.
It was a really cool moment.
Yeah. I bet that. Speaking of moments, like, do you have like a welcome to the big leagues moment that kind of stands out in your mind?
The one that stands out to me would be my start against Cleveland. Daniel Lynch and I had sat there and broken down their lineup the day before. He and I were just chatting through, like walking through their lineup. I was in the dugout. I was starting the next day, and we started chatting about, their whole lineup. And then we get to Jose Ramirez, and we start talking about things he does well, and he's very good at, if he gets beat by a pitch, he doesn't get beat by it again unless it's like perfectly executed. And so Dan told me that, and I was like, okay. So I get him the first time, and he comes back up, try to get him the second time with the same pitch, and he hits the grand slam. And that was one of the, like, it was like, okay, like, these guys that are good at something, they're really good at something. And so that was that moment of like, wow, like, these guys, it is a new level. It's different.
I wondered if that was it. I did take notice of that too, but it is, especially with Jose Ramirez, he seems to absolutely, I mean, he is, like you said, one of the best out there. But the fact that it just seems like he is a Royals killer. He could just one of those dudes that just, no matter what happens, no matter what game plan it is, it's going for extra bases every time he hits the ball. So it just seems like he's definitely one of those. So I wondered if that was the case. But kind of going into that, and you mentioned the mentality earlier, you've kind of come up and been a starter for most of your collegiate professional career. And this year you're kind of been asked to come out of the bullpen a few times. You've also started some games. You've been the bulk guy in some opener situations. So is there ever a change in mentality whenever you're asked to kind of come from different places, or is it purely just like get outs?
There's definitely a different mentality. At first, when I got called up out of the bullpen, the big thing for me was recovery. I was very used to having 4 or 5 days in between my outings. And so when I got up and was out of the bullpen, I was asking Scott Barlow, Clarkie, all the older guys that have kind of been here and done it. Clarkie, for example, like, he used to be a starter. Like, he transitioned to a bullpen role in the big leagues. And so I was picking their brain of like, hey, how do you recover? What are some things that you do? That was the first big transition. And then as of recently, the other big transition has been like pitch usage, like not trying to set pitches up near as much. Like, just throw your best stuff from the jump coming out of the bullpen. So that's kind of been the two big adjustments that I feel like I've had to make. But all in all, the mentality is kind of still the same, because as a starter, your goal is to keep your team in the game, give your team a chance to win. As a reliever, you come in the game, your goal is to keep the game right where it is and give your team a chance to win. So both mentalities are kind of the same. I think pitching in each situation is a little different, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. That makes total sense. I love that answer for sure. I would think that it yeah, it kind of comes from the same spot, but kind of executed differently. So, that kind of sounds like what it sounds like. But
Exactly.
kind of going back to your debut and working out of the bullpen, you kind of had those first few opportunities, those first few appearances where you actually set an MLB record for most batters faced without giving up a hit. I can imagine that not only since your opportunities are kind of spaced out, you were aware that that was a streak and it was happening in real time. So each time you entered the game, what was that like at all in your mind, even in the back of your mind? It's like, well, it would be cool to keep this streak going, but I'm just here to get outs. But at the same time, like, it's pretty damn cool. This streak is pretty awesome. Is it ever like on your mind at that point?
So at first, I don't think I really realized it until after I guess I tied the record in that one outing before we went to Tampa.
Yeah.
And after that, like, I saw a couple of things about it. And then in Tampa, it was my first time being like the bulk guy. Like, I knew kind of the game was in my hands. So that was more the focus there. And then I remember, I think I got into the third inning of work, like my third inning of work. And I was like, holy cow, like, this thing's still going. And obviously in that fourth inning, they got a hit. And I was like, oh man, like, that was pretty cool. I had no idea where, like, that I was close to the record. I really didn't, but it wasn't until like 3 innings into that game where I was like, let's see how long we can just keep this thing going. Like, obviously, the goal is to keep the team in the game. If this thing falls up, like, if the record falls off, as long as I'm keeping the team in the game, I'm good. But yeah, it going into that game, I had seen stuff about it, and then obviously it wasn't really at the forefront until like the third inning. I think I was like, wow.
Yeah, I would imagine that when you make your debut and you're like, man, it would be really cool to go out there and throw a perfect game, like right out of the gate. So to kind of do that in like over a stretch of time is pretty rad in and of itself. And then from a fan perspective, like it absolutely kind of got us like more pumped and more jacked to kind of see you come to the game, and here you go, like, be the bulk guy was the plan, was electric and an awesome moment for us outside of that stadium. So I can only imagine what it was, leading up to the moment, trying to be like, how long can we kind of stretch this? Is probably you're having fun with it at that point. So it's kind of cool to hear.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, let's get into the lightning round here.
All right.
So, do not be afraid of these answers, but we are going to ask you to kind of shoot from the hip as quickly as you can. But don't worry, this isn't about getting clickbaity sound bites or whatever. We're not trying to start any beefs in that clubhouse or anything. We might be trying to do that off the record, but it's well, let's get into the lightning round here. You and your wife announced the birth of your first kid, announced it back in May. So is your incoming and developing dad strength going to affect your pitching moving forward? Or do you have any worries about that?
I sure hope it affects it. I would love to gain a couple of miles an hour on my fastball.
Got to worry about that command, though. You got to harness that dad strength. This back in AA, you were rooming with Heasley, Bolin, Marsh, Parrish, if I'm recalling correctly.
Correct.
You can't say yourself. Which one of you was the worst roommate?
Oh, gracious.
Just say the name. Just say it.
All right.
Just let it go.
Let me think for just a second. All right. We only have one beef, and it was our shower drain got clogged, and Marsh was convinced that it was me. So I got to go Marsh on that, because he got mad at me that I clogged the shower drain when I know for a fact I did not clog the shower drain. I did have to snake out, though, because I was the only one that knew how to snake out and drain.
I love that is the typical, like, who's going to do the worst job, and that shower drain gets brutal sometimes from experience. You said Chipper was your guy growing up. Is that the favorite player then? That's the epitome of...
Absolutely. Yep. Chipper was my very favorite player. Every night I'd watch Crazy Train would come on and I'd get so excited.
Yep. Love it. So who was better, George Brett or Chipper Jones?
Oh, my gracious. I mean, George had the higher average, so I'd have to, and I can't go against George here.
Yep. I was gonna say that might get you some hot water from multiple sources, so I can understand that. I grew up with TBS, and I mean the Braves are my second team too, so I'm right there with you on Chipper. I really love them, and the pitching rotation back in the day was absolute nails. So
Crazy.
Right there with you. So the old adage goes: for hitters, chicks dig the long ball. For pitchers, chicks dig the blank. What do you got?
I gotta go zeros.
Yeah, love that. Zero's a great answer. What's the current walk-up song and why?
So in Omaha, it's "Bury Me in Georgia" by Kane Brown. Obviously, I'm from Georgia. I very much owe a lot of who I am to Georgia and where I grew up. Here, I haven't selected one yet, just because I feel like I'm still the new guy, and I don't really want to go out of my way to put anyone to work that doesn't need to be. So I just kind of go out there, whatever plays. I know opening or my debut, my walk-up song was "The Kiss Cam." So,
hey, everybody loves a kiss cam, right? I mean, if that doesn't get the blood flowing, I don't know what does. So
yeah.
Last question.
She was going to be "Bury Me in Georgia" right now.
Yep.
Just because of where I'm from.
Yeah, and I know you're a big country music fan, so that makes a lot of sense. It wasn't real sure if there was a Zach Brown band song that was top of the list or what, but being from Georgia, it makes a lot of sense there. But last question here in the lightning round. We've talked about it on the podcast before, but the voices that come through the pitch comms, we've always wondered, like, if there was any kind of variance that you could choose a voice, what would be your dream voice to come through? We've talked about like Samuel L. Jackson to kind of get the blood flowing. We talked about like Liam Hendricks because he's just going to be like yelling in your ear, get you juiced up. I've talked about Mark Wahlberg from The Departed, just that condescending Boston accent to just kind of get you motivated to do it. What's the dream voice that you would have on your pitch comm to kind of get you ready for the moment?
I'd go Rip Wheeler from Yellowstone.
Oh yeah, that's a good.
That would get me fired up.
Yeah, big Yellowstone guy then, huh?
I love Yellowstone. As much of a fan of the recent seasons, but as a whole, I loved Yellowstone. Watching it all the way through. Really excited for the rest of 1923 to come back out.
I need to catch the rest of that as well. The 1883 just blew my mind, so it was really cool to see. And I, big Yellowstone guy myself. Sarah, the same feelings about the last season of Yellowstone. You gotta step it up there, Sheridan. We need a little bit better.
I agree.
That's the end of the lightning round. I think we've covered Marsh. We've got George Brett is in good graces. Marsh not going to be in great graces, and Taylor Sheridan is now on the hot seat. So that's what we learned about Austin Cox here on the episode of One Royal Way. Check out Austin Cox on the mound near you. But Austin, we appreciate you joining us for the day, and hope to see you next time.
Well, thank you guys for having me.